Hey, everybody. So here it is, part two, chapter one, section two. Um, Fun fact this second half can kind of almost be explained to you if you watch the movie Rambo 3, which is highly recommended if you have not seen it. I don't know, for some reason people don't like Rambo 3 as much. Critics, who cares? I think Rambo 3 is awesome. Anyway, you'll see what I mean in just a little bit. Pledges to benign intent. Concealed the full implication of Star Wars. To skeptics, nuclear strategists worried that the pursuit of strategic defense might prove destabilizing. Reagan offered categorical assurances. The defense policy of the United States is based on a simple premise. The United States does not start fights. Okay, so his guys were warning him, like I just warned you, that nuclear weapons prevent war. Because everyone can blow each other up. If all of a sudden you make it so that you can blow someone up and they can't blow you up in return, that creates a problem. But then Reagan is like, don't worry, we don't start wars. I don't know if that's true, as we've talked about. Mexican-American War. All right. So here we go. Spanish-American War. Anyway, the Indian Wars. Anyway, sorry. The Revolution. Okay, sorry, here we go. We will never be an aggressor. We maintain our strength in order to deter and defend against aggression to preserve freedom and peace. Vietnam? All right. According to Reagan, the employment of U.S. forces for anything but defensive purposes was simply inconceivable. Every item in our defense program, our ships, our tanks, our planes, our funds for training and spare parts, is intended for one important purpose, to keep the peace. Reinhold Niebuhr once observed that this most significant moral characteristic of a nation is its hypocrisy. In international politics, the chief danger of hypocrisy is that it inhibits self-understanding. The hypocrite ends up fooling mainly himself. Whether or not in 1983 Ronald Reagan sincerely believed that the United States does not start fights, and by its nature could not commit acts of aggression, is impossible to say. He would hardly have been the first politician who came to believe what it was expedient for him to believe. What we can say with certainty is that events in our own time, most notably the Iraq War, have refuted Reagan's assurances with fateful consequences. Illusions about military power first fostered by Reagan outlived his presidency. Unambiguous global military supremacy became a standing aspiration. For the Pentagon, anything less than unquestioned dominance now qualified as dangerously inadequate. By the 1990s, the conviction that advanced technology held the key to unlocking hitherto undreamed of military capabilities had moved from the heavens to the earth. A new national security consensus emerged based on the conviction that the United States military could dominate the planet as Reagan had proposed to dominate outer space. In Washington, confidence with a high-quality military establishment dexterously employed could enable the United States, always with high-minded intentions, to organize the world to its liking, had essentially become a self-evident truth. In its malignant expectation, not in any of the conservative ideas for which he retrospectively venerated, lies the essential of the Reagan legacy. Just beneath the glitter of the Reagan years, the economic position of the United States continued to deteriorate. Despite the president's promise to restore energy independence, the reliance on import oil soared. Highlight this. By the end of Reagan's presidency, 41% of the oil consumed domestically came from abroad. Stop there. It was during this first term that growing demand for Chinese goods produced the first negative trading balance with that country. In the same period, Washington and the American people more generally resorted to borrowing. 41, voice still cracks. Remember that, all you teenage boys out there? Here's your future. No, all right. Throughout the 1970s, economic growth had enabled the United States to reduce the size of national debt, largely accrued during World War II, relative to the overall gross national product, GNP. At the beginning of the Reagan presidency, the ratio stood at a relatively modest 31.5% of GNP, the lowest since 1931. Reagan's huge deficit reversed that trend. The United States had long touted its status as a creditor. Nation, as a symbol of overall economic strength. That, too, ended in the Reagan era. In 1986, the net international investment position of the United States turned negative as the U.S. assets owned by foreigners exceeded the assets of the Americans owned abroad. The imbalance has continued to grow ever since. Even as the United States began accumulating trillions of dollars of debt, the inclination of individual Americans to save began to disappear. For most of the post-war era, personal savings had averaged a robust 8 to 10% of disposable income. In 1985, that figure began a gradual slide toward zero. Simultaneously, consumer debt increased so that by the end of the century, household debt exceeded household income. Hold on just a minute, I'll be right back. All right. And so what that means is you often hear about this nowadays, that no one has any money in their savings and that all their money is tied up in loans, right? House loans, car loans, boat loans, jet ski loans, because we want things now. We don't want to save up and buy them. I want to buy them on credit because I can have it now. And then if I lose my job, okay, so hence the crisis going, well, okay. An aspect of the crisis going on right now is that a lot of people we're under stay-at-home orders, and people don't have any money in their savings and therefore can't pay their bills because they were living paycheck to paycheck, right? That becomes a part of an issue. And the thing is that everybody needs to understand is that never used to be the norm. In the 50s and the 60s, that was not the norm. Since the 80s, it has built to the point where it now is the norm. All right? And that's kind of where they're getting at there. Highlight this. American profligacy during the 1980s had a powerful effect on foreign policy. The impact manifested itself in two ways. On the one hand, Reagan's willingness to spend without limit helped bring the Cold War to a peaceful conclusion. On the other hand, American habits of conspicuous consumption encouraged by Reagan drew the United States ever more deeply into the vortex of the Islamic world, saddling an increasingly debt-ridden and energy-dependent nation with commitments that it could neither shed nor sustain. Stop there. By expending huge sums on an arsenal of high-tech weapons, Reagan nudged the Kremlin toward realization that the Soviet Union could no longer compete with the West. By doing nothing to check the country's reliance on foreign oil, he laid a trap into which its successors would stumble. If Reagan deserves plaudits for the former, he also deserves to be held accountable for the latter. Yet it would be a mistake. You have stopped highlighting, I hope. Yet it would be a mistake to imply that there were two Reagans, the one far-sighted statesman who won the Cold War, the other a chucklehead who bollocksed up the U.S. relations in the Islamic world. Cold War policy in the Middle Eastern policy did not exist in separate compartments. They were intimately, if perversely, connected. To employ the formulation preferred by Norman Podhoretz and other neoconservatives, new Republicans, new conservatives, after Reagan, viewing the Cold War and the global war on terror as successors of World Wars I and II, Reagan-era exertions undertaken to win World War III inadvertently paved the way for World War IV. World War III being the Cold War, World War IV being war on terror, while leaving the United States in an appreciably weaker position to conduct the struggle. The relationship between World War III, Cold War, and IV, Cold War on terror, becomes apparent when recalling Reagan's policy toward Afghanistan and Iraq, the former a seemingly brilliant success that within a decade gave birth to a quagmire, the latter a cynical gambit that backfired, touching off a sequence of events that would culminate in a stupendous disaster. As noted in the final report of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, a decade of conflict in Afghanistan from 1979 to 89 gave Islamist extremists a rallying point and a training field. The commissioners understate this case. In Afghanistan, jihadists took on a superpower, the Soviet Union, and won. They gained immeasurably in confidence and ambition, their efforts to be funded in a large measure by the American taxpayer. The billions that Reagan spent funneling weapons, ammunition, and other support for the Afghan Mujahideen were as nothing compared to the $1.2 trillion this administration expended modernizing U.S. military forces. Highlight this. Yet American policy in Afghanistan during the 80s illustrates the Reagan doctrine in its purest form. In the eyes of Reagan's admirers, it was a masterstroke, to a bold and successful effort to roll back the Soviet Empire. Stop there. And really, okay, so you want to look at Afghanistan in the 80s as like the Soviet Union's Vietnam. Afghanistan had a communist regime. The Mujahideen rebels against it. The Soviet Union goes in to prop up that communist regime and fight the Mujahideen. We support the Mujahideen. We give them weapons. We give them CIA training. Who's part of the Mujahideen? Osama freaking bin Laden. Who trained Osama bin Laden? The CIA. Who gave Osama bin Laden his weapons? The CIA. And we promised the Mujahideen, fight the Soviet Union, we'll give you weapons to do it, we'll give you money to do it, and when it's all over, we'll help you build your country. So the Mujahideen are like, we're in. All right? So let's think about this, because, all right, that's why in Rambo 3, he's fighting the Soviets. All right, and he's helping the Afghanis. Those Afghanis are Mujahideen. Think about the little boy he's helping, and we'll get back to that in a few minutes. All right. The exploits of the Afghan resistance, you should have stopped at Soviet Empire highlighting. The exploits of the Afghan resistance fired the president's imagination, and he offered the jihadists unstinting and enthusiastic support. In designating March 21st, 1982, Afghanistan Day, for example, Reagan proclaimed the freedom fighters of Afghanistan are defending principles of independence and freedom that form the basis of global security and stability. In point of fact, these freedom fighters had no interest at all in global security and stability. Reagan's depiction on their aims inverted the truth, as events soon demonstrated. Highlight this. Once the Soviets departed from Afghanistan, a vicious civil war ensued with radical Islamists, the Taliban, eventually emerging victorious. The Taliban, in turn, provided sanctuary to al-Qaeda. Stop there. From Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden plotted a holy war against the United States. Think about that. Did you get this? We promised the Mujahideen, fight the Soviets, and after we'll help you rebuild your country. We gave them millions, tens of millions of worth of weapons and money, right? And when it's all over, the Mujahideen are like, hey, we beat them. Let's help us build a country. Keep in mind that 80% of the population of Afghanistan is illiterate at this point. They're like, help us now. We gave them millions in missiles, and we would not even give them $100,000 to build a school. And we got on our planes and we said, good luck, see you later. What ensues between the Mujahideen? A civil war. What side wins that civil war? The Taliban. That little kid Rambo is helping? Taliban. What does the Taliban then do? Right, because Osama bin Laden has been trained helping the Mujahideen. Now he's got this group called, hey, Taliban, I got these guys come. Remember when I helped you guys defeat the Soviets? Well, now I got this new group called al-Qaeda. And one of our main goals is the Western Americans that screwed you guys over. Want to give me a place to do my work? And they said yes. And then 9/11 happened. Do you see what we did? We created this issue ourselves. Anyway. After the attacks on September 11, 2001, the United States rediscovered Afghanistan, overthrew the Taliban, and then stayed on, intent on creating a state aligned with the West. A mere dozen years after the Kremlin had thrown in the towel, the U.S. troops found themselves in a position not unlike that of the Soviet soldiers of the 1980s. Outsiders attempting to impose a political order on a fractious population animated by an almost pathological antipathy toward foreign occupiers. As long as it had remained, however, tenuously within the Kremlin sphere of influence, Afghanistan posed no threat to the United States, just as, before 1980, the 5 Central Asian republics of the Soviet Union, forming a crescent north of Afghanistan, hardly registered on the Pentagon's meter of strategic priorities or American consciousness. Once the Soviets were ousted from Afghanistan in 1989, the Soviet Union itself collapsed 2 years later. All that began to change. Highlight this. In the wake of 9/11 attacks planned in Afghanistan, all of Central Asia became more valuable real estate to the United States. In a sort of reverse domino theory, the importance now attributed to Afghanistan increased the importance of the entire region. Stop there. After September 2001, U.S. officials and analysts began using terms like strategic, crucial, critical when referring to Central Asia. Here was yet another large swath of territory to which American interests obliged the United States to attend. So the ripples caused by Reagan's Afghanistan policy continued to spread. Distracted by the big war in Iraq and the lesser war in Afghanistan, Americans have paid remarkably little attention to the story. Yet the evolution of military policy in relation to the stands of former Soviet Union nicely illustrates the extent to which foreign policy tradition of reflexive expansionism remains alive, long after it has ceased to make sense. In the Clinton years, the Pentagon had already begun to express interest in Central Asia, conducting peacekeeping exercises in the former Soviet republics and establishing military-to-military exchange programs. In 2001, in conjunction with the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the Bush administration launched far more intensive efforts to carve out a foothold for American power across Central Asia. Pentagon initiatives in the region still fall under the official rubric of engagement. This anodyne term encompasses a panoply of activities that, since 2001, have included recurring training missions, exercises, and war games, routine visits to the region by senior military officers and Defense Department civilians, and generous security assistance subsidies to train and equip local military forces. Highlight this. The purpose of engagement is to increase U.S. influence, especially over regional security establishments, facilitating access to the region of the U.S. by U.S. forces, and thereby laying the groundwork for future interventions. Stop there. With an eye toward the latter, the Pentagon has negotiated overflight rights as well as securing permission to use local facilities in several Central Asian republics. At Manas in Kyrgyzstan, the United States maintains a permanent air base established in December 2001. With that said, we conclude Limits of Power, Chapter 1, Section 2. I will see you guys later. Love you.